let's get the thoughts of someone who knows the sport inside and out, and that's Adam Carriker. He's the host of the Big Ten Show podcast on the Believe Networks. Adam, and of course, former Nebraska defensive lineman, and had an awesome career. Adam, thanks so much for the time. It's Maggie and Perloff. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
We're doing excellent. I know the Big Ten is your area, but if you could comment on the ACC for a moment, because I'm sure you're watching all of this very, very closely. I mean, Cal, Stanford, wrong ocean, guys. I mean, does this make any sense to you whatsoever?
I think the ACC is trying to do anything they can to stay around. They look at the Pac-4, and they don't want to end up like the Pac-4. They look at what the Big 12 did a couple of years ago. The Big 12 was proactive. 2 years ago, a lot of people thought the Big 12 wouldn't be around anymore. Now, if the Pac-4 goes away and the ACC is trying to stay around, but if they go away, we could essentially have three major conferences, the Big 10, SEC, bam, the Big 12 potentially. They're trying to be proactive. They're trying to avoid the mistake the Pac-12 made, and they're trying to be more like what the Big 12 did, and they're doing what they can to survive, so to speak, because they know the SEC and Big Ten are coming for North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, potentially, all these schools. So they're trying to be proactive.
Adam, you, of course, played in the Big 12 at Nebraska. You think if Nebraska could do it again, you know, to my mind, they sort of kicked this whole thing off, would they join the Big Ten in 2011, I believe?
Oh, man, from a competitive standpoint, we've struggled since then. All right. Now, so a lot of Nebraska fans might be like, no, maybe not. But I look around and I'm like, well, we're in one of the two most solid conferences that exist. And the Big 12 looks like it's doing all right. And I just talked about how they might be one of the final 3 or 4 left standing, but there's no guarantees there. Is Central Florida, Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, are they going to play like Power 5 conference teams week in and week out? They've never had to. They've done it sporadically every once in a while. So I, as a Nebraska person, as a Nebraska former player and alumni and all that stuff, Big Ten guy, we're in the conference that by far gives us the most stability, which is by far the best thing any program can look for right now. So I think we're in a good situation.
Adam Carriker is joining us, host of the Big Ten Show podcast on the Believe Networks. All right, so let's talk a little Nebraska, and we'll get into a few other things here. I mean, Matt Rule's first season, what's like the one big thing we should be looking for when it comes to Nebraska football this year?
Well, the big thing Husker fans are looking for is a bowl game, which we haven't been to in way too long. But beyond that, Matt Rule wants to be a lot more disciplined. He wants to be a lot more physical. He wants to be a lot more blue collar. They're going to bring him back. The fullback is kind of a big thing to Husker fans. Okay. And even something as simple when Marcus Satterfield was first hired, the offensive coordinator, we're going to huddle, you know, something as simple as that kind of made waves and made news, you know. So it's getting kind of back to what Nebraska used to be known for. Just a little bit. Now, what has stuck out to me so far with Coach Rule, they're going to be disciplined, and he's going to demand discipline, and he's setting that culture. We have a tight ends coach who is no longer here. We have a Miles Farmer who just entered the transfer portal. He was suspended to start fall camp. He started 16 games, second on the team in tackles last year. He's now in the transfer portal because of that suspension, and Isaac Gifford was stepping up and playing well. And then you look at Anthony Grant going into spring ball. He was the number 1 JUCO player in the country 2 years ago, our best running back a year ago, at least statistically, amount of carries wise, and he's suspended to start spring ball. So Matt Rule's trying to set the tone for discipline and accountability.
Adam, you played in the NFL and you played college, obviously. It didn't work out for Matt Rule at Carolina. Why is it going to be different in college? Is it a different skill set to be a head coach at both levels?
I don't really equate college success to NFL success or NFL lack of success to whether you're going to be successful as a college coach. You look at what Rule did at Temple. You look at what he did at Baylor. Those were 2 programs that were on hard times, and he built them right up. Now, you look at 2 of the greatest college football coaches of all time from a win-loss championships perspective, Nick Saban. All right. He goes to Miami. Doesn't go so great. I played with some guys in St. Louis who have some harsh things to say about Nick Saban because they were with him in Miami. But I'm pretty sure he's done all right as a college coach. You look at Urban Meyer. Didn't go gloriously at Jacksonville, to put it mildly, but he's a pretty darn good college football coach. So they're 2 different worlds. It's 2 different types of players. You've got, of course, you know, they're still amateurs, I guess, technically, but it's starting to change. But, you know, what has been up to this point is college players are technically amateurs versus grown men in the NFL. And you can't exactly take the same exact approach when you're coaching college players and what is supposed to be amateurs versus grown men with families, and this is how they put food on their table.
Adam Carriker is our guest now. So where this is going, though, as we started with like realignment and college football is just getting bigger, kind of moving more towards like an NFLification, if you will, because if you have the Big Ten and the SEC keep growing, it kind of starts to look like the NFC versus the AFC or something like that. We already have a 12-team college football playoff that's going to start next year. Is that necessarily a good thing for the student athlete themselves? Maybe I'll use student athlete in air quotes. Like you just mentioned, they're kind of supposed to be amateurs. We're getting further and further away from that, where the college football players are looking more and more like pros. We all love that they're getting paid. I'm not talking about that. But is that good for the players themselves that they're going to be treated more like professionals?
I think there's pluses and minuses. I think the fact that universities were making millions of dollars off these athletes, and a scholarship absolutely has value, but it didn't equate directly to the amount of money that was being made off them. Obviously, that has changed, so that's a plus. Minuses are you've got very young individuals who are going to have more money at their fingertips, things at their fingertips that they may or may not be ready for. And during my time in the NFL, I saw several individuals who were 22, 23 years old who had a hard time dealing with a lot of the things that I don't want to say fall into their lap, but they earned the right, but came into their lap once they entered the NFL. A lot of people didn't know how to handle them. Now you're doing that with even younger individuals. Okay. So there's pluses, there's minuses. I think there should be an education course or something available to help educate these 17, 18, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds as far as how do you handle this and what is the best way to go about being disciplined and taking care of this. So for me, there's pluses and minuses. As an overall whole, I'm not uber excited about where the sport is heading. I understand why. The almighty dollar, speaks the loudest. I get all that. College football is not going anywhere, that's for sure. So there is pluses and minuses, though.
Wait, what are you not looking forward to? What do you think is going to happen that could be negative the way it's going?
I'm going to miss the rivalries. There's several things. I'm going to miss the rivalries. You look at the Civil War is not going to exist anymore. Oregon State. You got the Apple Cup, Washington State. The backyard brawl's been gone for a while, which is Pitt and West Virginia. Nebraska, Oklahoma hardly ever play anymore. So you start with the rivalries, okay? And then when you start to think about beyond football, you think about baseball, softball, basketball, all these sports that travel way more than maybe just 6, 7, 8 times a year. That travel from L.A. to Piscataway, okay, West Coast to East Coast, Piscataway, New Jersey. I mean, you're doing this multiple times. Now, there's things you can do to try to alleviate this. You can do pods. So maybe Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Nebraska are kind of in a similar pod. And if you're Michigan and you're playing Oregon, maybe you kind of lump that into a Washington trip all at the same time. There's things you can do to alleviate it, but I think it's going to create a lot of hardships and challenges for players in sports that travel way more than football does.
Adam, last one for me, and we're talking to Adam Carriker, host of the Big Ten Show podcast on the Believe Networks. And I think a lot of people on the outside, you look at the Big Ten, and it looks like Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, and it's top heavy. Who do you think could crash the party there, if anyone, and who do you think is the best team in the conference?
Well, until somebody does something about it, I'm going to say Michigan. Okay, Ohio State's always going to have the talent. When you look at pure talent, they may be the most talented team in the conference, but I'm going to go with Michigan until Ohio State can continuously hit them in the mouth for 4 full quarters, because they have not done that 2 years in a row. Now, you look at Ohio State, okay, they've actually got new bodies up front, new quarterback. They got a lot of new this year. They got talent, but a lot of new. Who's going to pan out? Who's not? How are they going to gel? I actually like Penn State a little bit more than I do Ohio State. They got a lot of players coming back. They got a loaded backfield. Their schedule is very friendly, about the easiest schedule in the Big Ten Conference, and that's one thing they've really got going for them. I kind of like Minnesota. I think as good as Tanner Morgan was for years there at Minnesota, they've got an upgrade this year. They've got an explosive running back. The biggest thing, you could argue that they maybe have a better team than they've had, but the biggest thing they have going against them is either them or Purdue, have the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. So I'm curious how they're going to navigate that.
Adam, do you think Ryan Day would be in trouble at Ohio State if he lost again to Michigan?
Yes, I do. I mean, let's be honest. That's the big one right there. And if you lose 3 years in a row, that's going to be hard. And really, that Georgia game did a lot for him. It really, and I know they didn't win, but I don't want to say it saved his job, but it cooled his seat a lot because it was starting to get a little bit warm for sure.
Adam Carriker, host of the Big Ten Show podcast on Believe Networks. Adam, it's great to talk with you. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me. You too.